Good morning, dear students. Today, let me explain you about a new chapter from ecology part, that is concept of limiting factors. What are limiting factors? Organisms are surrounded and exposed to different types of environmental factors. Each species requires its own unique set of environmental conditions for survival. Organisms are composed of elements, and these elements are essential for their survival. They take up these elements in the form of nutrients. Certain elements such as carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, potassium, sulfur are required in large amounts, and a number of other elements are required in small amounts. You know that these factors which are required in small amounts are known as macronutrients, and those which are required in smaller amounts, they are called micronutrients. Probably you have studied about this concept in your previous classes. These are the factors which influence the growth, reproduction, abundance, distribution, behavior, and survival of the organisms. These factors restrict the growth, reproduction, and distribution of the organisms, hence, they are called limiting factors. Some examples of limiting factors like temperature, light, soil, humidity, carbon dioxide, oxygen, pressure, etc. are the important limiting factors. When an environmental factor remains constant and abundant, and it is the state where the organisms has a wide range of tolerance, the factor is not a limiting factor. But if the factor fluctuates and if the organisms has narrow limit of tolerance, the factor can be called as a limiting factor. For example, oxygen is abundant on land, hence it is not a limiting factor on land. But the amount of oxygen is highly variable and low in water sources or water bodies. Thus, oxygen becomes a limiting factor for aquatic organisms only. Some basic concepts of limiting factors. There are three laws to explain the mechanism of limiting factors. They are: number 1, law of minimum; 2, law of tolerance; and 3, law of combined concept. First one, law of minimum, also known as Liebig's law of minimum. Liebig, a German biochemist, proposed the law of minimum in 1840. It states that growth of an organism is dependent on the foodstuff that is present in minimum quantity. It also states that if one of the essential plant nutrients is deficient, plant growth will be poor even when all other essential nutrients are abundant. Example, corn crab plant is not much affected by variations in nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, but by the availability of trace elements such as boron, molybdenum, magnesium, etc. Example 2. Sunlight in the rainforest, where growth is limited to all plants in the understory or shade unless more light becomes available. Third one, phosphorus is required by plants as a nutrient and it acts as a limiting factor. For example, in a lake, phosphorus is a limiting factor in the growth of algae. When phosphorus containing detergent is added to the lake, algae will grow and produce a spectacular bloom of algae. This rapid growth consumes another essential element of water, namely calcium. Hence, algae begin to die. The dead algae are decomposed by bacteria. As the bacterial population increases, they begin to use up the oxygen of the water. Eventually, the amount of oxygen drops below the tolerance of fishes and other aquatic organisms. Factor interaction. This is a subsidiary principle to the law of minimum. According to this principle, the amount of one nutrient taken is found to depend upon the amount of other nutrients. Example, when calcium is deficient and strontium is abundant in the environment, organisms can substitute one for the other. That means if calcium is very less in concentration, then they start using up strontium if it is available in abundance. Liebig's law was basically concerned with factors affecting the growth of crop plants. In croplands, growth and yield are not limited by macronutrients such as carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, calcium, sulfur, etc. available in large quantity, but by the micronutrients like ferrous, manganese, molybdenum, copper, zinc, etc., which are scarce. So you should note down one important thing here, students, that instead of macronutrients, micronutrients play a very important role in the growth and development of living organisms because they are found in very smaller amounts. His law is applicable only under steady state conditions. Later, F. Blackman and Taylor modified the law of minimum by adding factors like temperature, light, etc., and now it is called Liebig's Blackman's law of limiting factors. The function of an organism is limited or controlled by combination of environmental factors present in an ecosystem. Second law, law of tolerance, also known as Shelford's law of tolerance. This law was proposed by Shelford in 1913. He noted a weakness or drawback in Liebig's law and proposed a law of tolerance instead of minimum. According to this law, organisms are exposed to a variety of environmental factors like light, temperature, nutrients, etc. They respond differently to the different intensities of environmental factors. It states that each ecological factor to which an organism responds has maximum and minimum limiting effects in between which lies a range of tolerance. Let us go through some salient features of this law of tolerance or Shelford's law of tolerance. First one, each species is able to exist and reproduce successfully only within a definite range of environmental conditions. Organisms may be limited in growth and occurrence not only by too little of an element or factor but also by too much of the element or factor. For example, carbon dioxide is necessary for the growth of all green plants. Third one, small increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere may increase the rate of plant growth, but considerable increase of carbon dioxide proves to be toxic. That means it will be a fatal impact. Likewise, small addition of arsenic to the human diet having health benefit. However, further increase in the dosage proves to be toxic or fatal, that is death causing. Fifth one, Organisms can be limited both by too little of an element or factor and too much. In between upper and lower limit lies a broad zone of tolerance or biokinetic zone. So it is the zone in which, as the name itself suggests, biokinetic. That means the living organisms will be very active in this zone, hence called biokinetic zone or the zone of tolerance. Seventh one, organisms have wide range of tolerance for one factor and narrow range for another. Organisms having wide range of tolerance for all the factors are widely distributed. When conditions for a factor becomes optimum, which reduces the tolerance for other factor. For example, low concentration of soil nitrates reduces the drought resistance of grasses. Next one, narrow range of tolerance can be seen during critical stages of life such as egg, larva, seedling, embryo, etc. Next one, narrow range of tolerance is usually referred with a prefix steno and a wide range of tolerance with uri. For example, stenothermal means narrow range of tolerance to temperature and eurythermal means wide range of tolerance to temperature. Let me go through one more example here. Stenohaline refers to the narrow range of conditions with reference to salinity, whereas euryhaline refers to the broad range or the wide range of tolerance to salinity. Some physical factors of importance as limiting factors. As I said earlier, temperature. Life can only exist within minus 200 degree to 100 degrees Celsius. Most species are restricted to a narrow range of temperature. Aquatic organisms have narrower range of tolerance than equivalent land animals. Organisms which are subjected to temperature variations tend to be depressed, inhibited, or slowed down by a constant temperature fluctuation. So here is a picture which clearly depicts you how the temperature affects on the survival of living organisms. So as you observe here, on one axis the activity is being represented, and on the other axis temperature is being depicted, and in stenothermal condition, which is also called oligothermal, their activity is said to be starting from minimum to optimum, optimum to maximum. Whereas you see that eurythermal, which is said to be a broad or wide range of tolerance, you can clearly make out that wide range of tolerance here in this diagram. On the other hand, on the right hand side, you will observe stenothermal, where it is said to be polythermal optimum and minimum and maximum range of tolerance is being depicted here. Now some graphical representation of law of tolerance. Again here, on one of the axis number of individuals is being shown, and on the other axis environmental factor is being shown, and you see on the left hand side the zone of tolerance is depicted, next to which zone of stress there is a slight stress slight stress when the environmental factor increases, and there will be the optimum zone where you can see the biokinetic zone. It is the zone, as I mentioned earlier, it is the most active zone of a particular organism or a group of organisms. Then on the right hand side of this peak there will be zone of stress, and then again there will be zone of tolerance. So these are the important aspects that we have learnt here from this graph. Thus, the law of tolerance by Shelford's law revealed that the growth and development of organism depends on the maximum and minimum limits of factors involved in the biological process. Thus, every factor has own maximum and minimum limits in every organism, and the zone of tolerance is the range between these two limits. Based on this, the environmental factors have two zones, that is zone of intolerance and zone of tolerance. Further, the zone of tolerance is subdivided into three zones: optimal zone, critical minimum zone, and critical maximum zone. Coming to zone of intolerance, the zone unfavorable for the growth and development of organisms is termed as zone of intolerance. The limit of tolerance varies from species to species with respect to different factors. Organism survives best if have a wide range of tolerance and broad distribution range. Second one, zone of tolerance. An organism grows best in the zone of tolerance, which is favorable for its development. This zone is subdivided into three zones, as I mentioned earlier: optimum zone, critical minimum zone, and critical maximum zone. Coming to first one, optimal zone. Optimum zone is the most favorable zone in the range between two extreme limits, thus supports maximum for the growth and development of organisms. Critical minimum zone. It is the lowest limit of minimum below which the organism growth is inhibited. Critical maximum zone. It's a maximum limit of tolerance zone above which organism growth ceases. The details of which we have already learnt in the graph in the previous slide. Now coming to the third concept, combined concept of limiting factors. This law was proposed by Odom in 1971. It states that the presence and success of an organism or a group of organisms depend upon a complex of conditions. Organisms in nature are controlled by the quantity and variability of materials for which there is a minimum requirement. The limits of tolerance of the organisms themselves to these factors and other components of the environment. For example, oxygen is so abundant, constant, and readily available to terrestrial organisms, but it is relatively less in aquatic environment. Hence, a limiting factor for aquatic organisms. Now, light and temperature as limiting factors. First one, light as limiting factor. Since photosynthesis cannot begin without light, it is the first limiting factor. Plants use chlorophyll, usually found in their leaves, to absorb sunlight. The light energy from the sun helps to transform carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. Without light, the photosynthesis is impossible. As sunlight hits more of the chlorophyll molecules, the rate of photosynthesis increases. At a certain light level or concentration, or the quantum, the rate tends to stop increasing due to different limiting factors. At extremely high levels of light, the rate of photosynthesis might even decrease as the chlorophyll molecules get damaged. This level varies from plant to plant, which is why some plants need to be kept in the shades, whereas others do perfectly well in direct sunlight. Now, second one, temperature as limiting factor. Living organisms use enzymes, protein molecules to assist in carrying out the reactions necessary to build and store glucose. The rate at which these enzymes work is affected by temperature, which makes temperature as another major limiting factor. The optimum temperature is between 10 to 20 degrees Celsius, though this can vary widely depending on the plant type. At low temperatures, the enzymes cannot function properly, and so the rate of photosynthesis decreases. The same is true at very high temperatures. At very high temperatures, above 40 degrees Celsius, the enzymes gets denatured or damaged, which sharply decreases the rate of photosynthesis. Hence, temperature acts as an important limiting factor.